All right, so in a shorter video previously, I showed you a really brief introduction to Amazon Redshift, which is a database technology. Um, I wanted to give you a much longer, like sort of a walkthrough of the data flow that I created to take tweets from Twitter and then inserting them into Redshift. So again, a quick spin up on Redshift. It's a really simple way to create a SQL type database on Amazon clusters. It's really cheap. I'm actually going to show you how to do it for free if you still have a free trial. Uses standard PostgreSQL drivers. I'm actually using psychopg2 in Python. That's the one I'm going to show you. So it's whatever you feel comfortable using in terms of coding, in terms of your SQL client, you can use, and it's pretty easy. So getting started is really simple. I think it's actually even easier than setting up an EC2 cluster. So basically, you just go into Redshift on your AWS management tool. You click on Redshift, and then you click on Launch Cluster, and you'll get a page like this where it says you got to name your cluster. So in this case, I named it Tweet Cluster. The database name is optional, but I named it Tweets in this case. The database port 5439 is the default port, and you give it a username and a password. Next, you get an option to choose how big you want this cluster to be. DW2.large is the default one, and for this case, it was plenty of computing power. And then finally, you get some security settings that you can change here. Now, for this demo, I went with the default settings. I didn't restrict any of the inbound traffic or anything, but I recommend you do that for your case, so that you can restrict the inbound traffic from either your local machine or an EC2 cluster if you're running that. That way, you don't get people going into your database. All right. So here's the crucial part. Once you do have that cluster launched, it takes a couple of minutes. You go into the actual cluster, and I'll show you how to do this in the web interface. Here's the information that you need to actually log into the database from whatever API you're using or whatever SQL client you're using. This endpoint here, you already know your username, you already know your password, and the port is standard unless you changed it. But you need this endpoint information, and that's pretty much it. So setting up the cluster takes like 5 minutes. Then it's just a matter of figuring out how you actually want to manipulate the tables. I'm going to show you how to do it in Python. I'm going to show you this example with the tweets to find out how many iPhones and how many Androids are out there on Twitter, and use the properties that I just showed you in order to connect to the database. And that is about it. So I'm going to actually exit the slides here, and I'm going to show you the web interface to show you how easy this is. So basically, you just hit the launch cluster button. You go through the steps that I just showed you, and then it should launch a cluster. In this case here, I have two clusters, Tweet Cluster 1 and Tweet Cluster 2. You click on the actual cluster in order to get this endpoint information that I showed you. So once you have that, you can then connect to the database through your SQL client. Now, in my case, I tried doing this through my Mac, so I'll give you a little backstory. I wanted to use that psychopg2 module in Python in order to connect to the database, to Redshift. But I ran into a lot of problems connecting that or installing that module on my Mac. So I ended up trying it on an EC2 cluster. It installs really super easily. So I ended up just launching an EC2 cluster and installing psychopg2 on the EC2 cluster, and then running all the code I'm going to show you on the EC2 cluster. So I'm actually going to show you. I should already be logged in to the EC2 cluster. I'm going to run that through live. Okay, I'm in. So as you can see, I actually have a bunch of stuff in my EC2 cluster already. I've got some Python scripts that I was working on, some prototypes, and I've actually got some tweet data that I wrote to CSV. So I'm going to show you how to install psychopg2 in case you've never done it. because like I said, I ran into a lot of issues running it on my local machine. So I think that's pretty important. You're just gonna hit you're gonna type in sudo yum install gcc python setup tools python devel post SQL devel, and this is already loaded on this machine, so nothing new is installing. I'm just going through the steps again, and then we're going to do a sudo easy install of psychopg2. Again, already installed. Whoa. Let's see. Sudo easy install psychopg2. I spelled it wrong. There we go. Already done. We're just going to double check in the Python module or in the Python console to see if we can import it. No error, so we're good. So I'm going to exit out of here. Oops. There we go. And exit out of there, and then actually I'm going to walk you through the code now. I'm going to show you the code I actually used to do all this stuff. So I started with importing all the stuff that we need to actually do this. I forgot to show you how to import the OAuth2. That's pretty straightforward. Sudo pip install OAuth2. Should already be installed since I've done it. Done. All right. So we import the OAuth2 module that we need to authenticate into the Twitter API. I imported the urlib2, which allows me to make those requests over the net. Imported JSON in order to be able to parse the JSON string that we get from Twitter. And then I import the psychopg2 module, which we're actually going to use to talk to Redshift. Lastly, I import this httplib module, and I'll show you why. This is to fix some errors that I got when I was doing this. We're going to set up the Redshift connection using this code here. It's basically just taking the data that I showed you from the Redshift cluster console and passing it to psychopg2 in order to set up the connection. Then we set up our cursor using db.cursor, and we can create a table using cursor.execute. Creating the table is really, it's basic. I mean, if you've used SQL before, this is going to look super familiar. I mean, you're basically creating a table, giving it the table name, and then giving it the column names, and telling it about those actual columns, the properties. So in this case, I'm using, for example, for the technology field that I'm interested in, that's going to be varchar 512. For the followers, favorites, and friends, those are all numbers, so I cast those as integers. Next, we commit those changes to the database, otherwise none of this stuff actually happens. That's really important. I've seen a lot of stuff online where people are wondering why none of their stuff changed, and this is the main reason why. So here I'm going to show you the authentication. This is obviously my information. I'm going to have to change it after this video, but you get this information from Twitter. If you've never set up a Twitter app, there's a lot of documentation online on how to do it. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video because I've only got 15 minutes, but when you set up a Twitter app on Twitter's development page, you're going to get a set of keys and secrets and access tokens. You're going to use these to authenticate. Also, they give some examples on how to actually get data from the API. So in this case, I'm interested in all the tweets that are out there at a given time. You can create queries that look for certain hashtags and things like that, but I want a total sample of all the tweets online. So, excuse me, this is the URL that we're going to use. If you've never done this authentication stuff, it can be a little tricky. Like I said, there's a lot of documentation out there on how to do it. This is one particular way. I set up a consumer variable. I set up a token variable with the information up here. I set up a signature method, and then I create the request using all of that stuff. Next, I sign the request with the signature, and then I want to get the data. Now I'm going to skip this part here for a second. Here's the actual request. I'm going to try to open up that URL with the request, and then I'm going to store that into this results variable. Now, I skipped over this part for a reason. I ran into a lot of incomplete read errors when I tried this the first few times. So did a little bit of research, and I found that there was this monkey patch available in order to bypass all those errors. So I implemented this code that I found right before the request, and I stopped getting these incomplete read errors, which was really nice. So next, once we have this result object, all we're doing is looping through the results and pulling out the values that we want from the JSON string. Twitter, you're going to get this really big, long JSON string from Twitter. You may not necessarily care about all the different fields in it. So here I'm just parsing out, for example, the screen name, which I want, the text, the actual tweet text that I want. And the question I'm trying to answer in terms of technology use on Twitter is right here in the source field. I parse these other fields out there just for practice, but you know, for my purposes, I didn't really need them. I did a little bit of cleaning here. I think I could probably do some more, but this seemed to do the job. And then here's another critical part. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually put all this stuff into Redshift. I mean, it's not just about, you know, parsing this stuff in Python and querying this stuff in Python. What we want to do is actually put it in the Redshift table. So we do cursor.execute and then insert the actual, you know, we call the tweet table name and then insert the values into the columns that we want. Really straightforward. Like I said, I found this very, very simple to do. And again, to make sure that every time that we insert this stuff that it takes, we want to hit the db.commit. That is all the code right there. So I'm actually gonna try this for you live. So I've already got the script loaded up. Into my EC2. What's going on here? There we go. I need to change the table name because we're actually going to create a table on the fly on the cluster that we already launched. And so I need to go in here and change it. So I'm going to create table 4 in this database. Oops. I guess I need to do that first. And then we're going to make sure that we insert into the right table because we're creating a new table up top and then we're inserting into a table at the bottom. We want to make sure that those two coincide. All right. So we've now got 4 tables on this database. Oops. There we go. All right. So I'm going to run this code. And let it go for a little bit. And now what we can do is we can go to the Redshift web interface and see if this thing's actually working. So we're inserting into a table on the tweet cluster. So we can go into queries and then hit the refresh button and see if this is actually working. So I've got 318 is the time I have, and it looks like it's starting to ingest data at the same time. So if we keep hitting this refresh button, this thing should update, and it is, with all of the tweets that are going in there as the script is running. So this is what's cool, is that, you know, this is the real-time aspect of it. So if you can imagine, you've got a script going and that's ingesting data, and it's updating it periodically. You can see all of the new tweets as they come in, and you can also query the data as it comes in. So say, for example, we let this code run for, you know, a couple of minutes or a couple of hours or a couple of days, however much computing we have on hand and however much data we end up needing. What we want to do next is actually start asking some questions of the data. I mean, that's the whole point of this. It's not just to store data, but it's actually to learn something of the data. So I showed you how to get tweets from Twitter really briefly. I showed you how to set up a Redshift cluster. You should probably already know how to launch an EC2 cluster. It's really simple. How to set up the EC2 cluster in order to run all this stuff, that was pretty important. I showed you the code on how to get tweets from Twitter and also how to push the tweets from Twitter into Redshift. The last thing that I wanted to show you is how to actually ask a question of the data once you have it in there. So in order to do this, we need to set up a query in the Python console. So I'm going to bring this, let's see, I'm going to SSH in again. Let's see here. So I am on, bear with me for a second. What is, there we go. Let's see if this works. All right, we're in. Make sure it's the right one. Yep. We're going to go into Python. And then what we want to do is use the database information in order to talk to the database. So we need this database information here. So I'm going to take that. Actually, I need to make sure this is imported first. There we go. I'm going to set up the connection. Set up the cursor. Now I can run a query. So I'm going to type cursor execute, select tech, because I want to know about the tech. I'm going to count the tech from the tweet table, 4, and then I'm going to group by the tech. Oops, forgot to order it. Order by 2 descending. Okay. Now the results, we're going to fetch all from the cursor. And then we're just going to loop through the results. And we're going to print each result. And this should give us an ordered list of the counts of the technology. Bam, there we go. So we've got a lot of 1 counts for some of these technologies, but then way up at the top, we've got like some really good groupings. So for example, we've got 706 tweets that were posted by the iPhone. We've got 292 tweets that were posted by Android. And I've run this same type of analytic query and data flow like several times over the last few days, and it's pretty consistent that iPhone on average is somewhere around twice as many tweet posts than the Android folks. So that's pretty much it. That's how easy this is. It took me a couple of minutes to set up the Redshift cluster. It takes a couple of minutes to set up an EC2 cluster. And then the code is I mean, there's hardly any lines in that code. The biggest thing to watch out for is just to make sure that you have the right the endpoint information for the database, and that you have the right authentication data for Twitter or whatever API that you happen to use. Excuse me. And then it's just a matter of inserting that data into the database so that you have your real-time information there. And it's just a matter of then thinking of the interesting questions that you want to ask of the data, and querying the data through whatever SQL client that you feel comfortable using. So that concludes this demo. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, comments, please send them my way.